Welcome back to State of Belief Radio. I'm Welton Gaddy. Last weekend was full of extremist right-wing activity. In addition to the response in Baton Rouge, we saw the Iowa Freedom Summit bring together pastors and politicians. You could only tell them apart by the name tags. A march against reproductive rights took place in Washington, and an initiative to elect 1,000 pastors to political office gained the endorsement of prominent politicians. Writing prolifically about all of this has been investigative journalist Sarah Posner. When I saw her name on the show today, I said, thank goodness this is going to be good. I'm very happy to welcome Sarah Posner back to State of Belief Radio. Hello, Sarah.
Hello, Welton. Thank you.
I'm not exaggerating when I say there was some truly extremist rhetoric coming out of that Iowa Freedom Summit. Sarah, how much of that is going to be significant in the long term? And if you can, tell me we're not going to have to listen to that for 2 years.
Oh, we're going to have to listen to that for, I would say, another year or so, until the Republican primary is finished and there is a nominee who will then track back to the center. But it's already clear that with Mike Huckabee especially in the race, and he has not denied that he is running, I think he is the one who's really going to push the rhetoric, at least on issues like culture war issues and religion issues, far to the right, maybe even more than Rick Santorum has been.
Did anything in particular stand out for you in the Iowa antics and rhetoric?
Well, for one thing, I think that the people who do that bad lip reading show I think they do it on Funny or Die, where they splice in lip reading of politicians and whatnot. They don't need to do it for Sarah Palin because she already just spouted some ridiculous, incomprehensible speech at the Iowa Freedom Summit. So that's already done. The thing that really stood out to me, though, and this was not new at the Iowa Freedom Summit. This is something that Mike Huckabee has been going around saying in the media and on radio interviews. It was Mike Huckabee talking about the Supreme Court. And he's basically saying the Supreme Court does not have the authority to decide whether bans on same-sex marriage violate the constitutional rights of gay and lesbian citizens. He thinks that this should not be a matter that's decided with any finality or certainty by the Supreme Court. Now, he claims to love the Constitution. So if he does love the Constitution, he should know that he is completely incorrect about this. Now, I will add that this same idea, the same notion that the Supreme Court does not decide whether or cannot decide whether laws are unconstitutional or not, was playing out yesterday in Alabama, where our good friend Roy Moore wrote a letter to the governor saying that as Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court, he didn't think that anything federal courts had to say on the Alabama same-sex marriage ban would be binding on him.
Goodness. Sarah, was there anything that surprised you given the context of that event in Iowa?
Not really. I think that, Steve King, who hosted or sponsored it, is well known for his extremist views, not just on religious issues or issues relating to abortion, gay rights, separation of church and state, and so on. So the fact that he was sponsoring it and that the candidates were trying to hew to his audience, that was very telling. And I think it was very telling about what the candidates are willing to do to win in Iowa. King is, even by the standards of the Republican Party, I mean, he's probably one of the furthest right and furthest out there rhetorically of any members of Congress. I mean, I think he's in the company of maybe Louis Gohmert and a couple of others. And so the fact that he's the one who's kind of the kingmaker and the one creating the environment where the candidates will try to out conservative each other is really just telling about where they're willing to go and who they're willing to be their representative on these sorts of be their representative on reaching out to the base. Now, not all of the candidates or potential candidates went. Mitt Romney wasn't there. Jeb Bush wasn't there. But you see where this is playing out with the other candidates. They're all trying to run to each other's rights.
Yeah, I actually thought it was funny. Jindal wasn't there because he couldn't get there because he was involved in his evangelistic campaign.
Yes, and Jindal couldn't go because he already had lined up his response. And, Perry had already done that. Perry did that in 2011 and a couple days later announced his presidential candidacy. But I think that Jindal wasn't as good at it as Perry was, to be honest.
Right. And he's in a lot more trouble than Perry was when he did his. Sarah, some analysts implied that Iowa was a bit of a sideshow, that the real action was occurring at the Koch brothers summit in California because their 2016 campaign budget's almost double what the GOP spent in the past presidential election. So
right.
Do you think there's a chance of new faces emerging in the race for the White House with less religious right and more Tea Party economic focus in their platforms?
Well, I think that somebody like Scott Walker or Marco Rubio might fit the bill there. Or somebody who can cross over into both worlds, which both of those candidates can do. I mean, I think that in the Republican Party, the reason why you see Romney and Bush stepping out there and trying to outdo each other with their early entry into the pre-primary, the invisible primary that people like to call it, is because there is a sense within the Republican Party that they need a sort of quote-unquote mainstream, business-oriented candidate to run for them, that they cannot put somebody into the general election who's seen as a right-wing religious panderer to the religious right. But, and this is exactly what happened in 2008. It's what happened in 2012. All these candidates were in. They provoked all this discussion during the primaries especially in Iowa, South Carolina, and Florida about religion and religious issues and LGBT rights and abortion and so forth. And then ultimately, they all competed with each other. And then in 2008, it was John McCain who emerged victorious out of that field. And in 2012, it was Mitt Romney who emerged out of that field. Now, that's not to say that they didn't try to pander to that same audience. They did, but just not in the same way that a Mike Huckabee or a Rick Perry or Sarah Palin, if she ran, a Sarah Palin would. So I think that I think the Republicans and maybe the Koch brothers are looking for somebody who can be so locked in before all of that sideshow even starts that the money will be in that person's corner and nobody else could even conceivably compete with it. But I don't think that's going to hold any of these candidates back. I think that they're still going to want to campaign on principle, and because they don't want to be shoved aside because the people with the money decided that Jeb Bush or Mitt Romney was the person they wanted to back.
Sarah, has God endorsed anybody yet?
I think there are a lot of people who probably think he has, namely certain candidates, but I don't think so.
I ask that humorously because if I think about it seriously, I think about the last primaries we went through, and I almost want to cry about the kind of impressions of divinity that came out of that political debate. But isn't it true, or is it true, I should be asking, that honestly what went on in the Koch brothers' decision-making about their sponsorship is in the end going to be far more important than just the identity rhetoric that went on in Iowa?
Yes. I mean, the money is going to be huge, obviously, right? So whoever attracts the attention of this huge amount of money that's going to go into super PACs, be it from the Koch brothers or, let's not forget, Sheldon Adelson, that's going to play a huge role, because if you have money or if you have a super PAC running ads on your behalf, you're going to be in front of voters a lot more than somebody who doesn't have money. But, in Iowa, I mean, I've been to Iowa for the straw poll and I've been to Iowa for the caucuses. And I find that the voters there are smart enough to know that they don't need to care about how many ads are on TV, because they have the opportunity to meet the candidates one-on-one. I mean, and that's something that you don't really see outside of Iowa and New Hampshire. But then on the other hand, nobody who's won the Iowa caucuses in recent memory has gone on to win the nomination. So we had Rick Santorum in 2012, we had Mike Huckabee in 2008. And so it's almost like Iowa plays this role of anointing, shall I say, the most perfect religious right candidate, who then, of course, doesn't have the money or organization or backing of the big business interests to get any further than that.
Sarah, we're staying with religion and politics, but changing the subject just a little bit. We saw an energetic March for Life in Washington last weekend, followed by some unexpected results with anti-abortion legislation on the House floor. Would you talk about whether or not that movement is gaining ground across the nation as advocates insist, or are they wrong?
I think that public opinion polling on abortion has been pretty static over the past several years. So the idea that they're gaining ground in terms of public opinion, I think they're just blowing smoke on that. On the other hand, they have succeeded in many, many states in restricting access to abortion. If you look at Texas as an example, there's just maybe a handful. I don't remember how many, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't remember the numbers, but very few facilities remain where a woman can get a safe abortion. So they've been very successful on that front, despite the fact that they really haven't gained ground in public opinion. Now, I think this controversy that played out the night before the March for Life, where congressional leaders decided to shelve this pain-capable Unborn Child Protection Act, is indicative of the nervousness of many Republicans who are worried that their party has just gone too far on this issue. And I think that signals that they know where their constituents are on this. And these are representatives, from red states, from North Carolina, from Indiana. And they realize that some of this is too extreme for their constituents. And so I think you're going to see a battle within the Republican Party over this. And I think it's going to be very interesting for voters, because I think they're going to realize that the GOP is a little nervous about what it's portrayed as its lock on this issue.
So, Sarah, tell me what you think about 1,000 pastors running for public office. Who are the folks behind that?
Okay, so David Lane, he is a fellow who founded this organization called the American Renewal Project. And it is known for hosting these pastors' policy briefings, particularly around election time or primary time. They've done it in the states a little bit, but they're most known for it around the Republican presidential primary, where they bring in people like David Barton or Don Wildman of the American Family Association, which has a close relationship with the American Renewal Project. And they basically give lectures to pastors about why it's okay for them to be involved in politics and endorse candidates, and why God wants them to be involved in politics, and how America is a Christian nation. Lane's latest project is to recruit 1,000 pastors to run for office. And he had a training session for them in Baton Rouge the day before Bobby Jindal's prayer rally. And I think that this is a little bit of a mimic of the 1980s, 1990s Christian Coalition, recruiting people to run for state, local office first, rather than shooting for the stars from the outset. But the idea of specifically recruiting pastors for it is a little bit new.
Sarah, do they reason that what they're asking to be done and the reasons why they're asking that it be done really is a critique of secular democracy? Have they just given up on that?
They don't believe that that's what America is. They believe that America was founded as a Christian nation, that it has been perverted by secularism and feminism and LGBT rights, and the list probably goes on. And so they believe that what they're doing is restoring America to its Christian heritage. And that's why they think they need pastors to run for office, because, of course, you could trust pastors to actually run the country as a Christian nation, to govern from a biblical standpoint, what they think is a biblical standpoint.
Sarah, you're really good and you write rapidly, but I don't know that you can write rapidly enough to keep up with what's going on right now. But I have to ask you, is anything else at the top of your agenda that we haven't talked about today that you're going to keep an eye on in the months ahead?
Well, I think that when you look at this controversy that's playing out in Congress right now over the appearance of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, I think that this appearance that was organized by the Israeli ambassador to the United States, Ron Dermer, with Speaker of the House John Boehner, bypassing the White House and, shockingly enough, even bypassing AIPAC. I think that what that signals is not so much that we should be paying attention to what AIPAC is doing or what Jewish organizations are doing with regard to advocacy in Congress about Israel, but what Christian Zionist groups are doing with regard to advocacy on Israel in Congress. And I think that what's been underreported about that incident is whether who John Boehner was listening to exactly, because it's clear from the reporting of Ron Campius at the Jewish Telegraphic Agency that AIPAC was just sideswiped by this. They didn't know that it was happening, and so who was Boehner trying to please? And because certainly there is when the Speaker of the House does something like this, they're trying to please a constituency. Now, maybe the constituency is we want to poke Obama in the eye constituency, but something tells me that there's more going on there.
Well, we're going to expect you to analyze that after it happens and see where that may go. Sarah Posner is an investigative journalist of the first order who writes widely about religion and politics for the Washington Post, The Guardian, The Atlantic, The American Prospect, The Nation, Salon, and Religion Dispatches. We're going to have links at stateofbelief.com to all of her excellent articles on the subjects that we covered today. Sarah's the author of the book God's Prophets, Profits, Faith, Fraud, and the Republican Crusade for Values Voters. Sarah, it's obvious how busy you are. It's also obvious how much you know about this material. As always, I thank you for taking time to be with us at State of Belief, and I encourage you to keep up the analysis and the good writing you're doing.
Thank you so much, Welton.